This is the do-it-yourself guide to business buying. Today, we're talking about the accepted offer. Welcome, business buyers. What is our goal with this video, the accepted offer? Well, two main goals. Number one, how and when to make a soft offer. And number two, what happens after an offer is accepted? Let's start with the first one, how and when to make a soft offer. Well, a preliminary or soft offer is used to test the waters if and when it's needed. Well, what does that mean? It sounds a bit vague. Well, you'll recall from a previous video that when we find a deal, time and effort needs to be poured in when we move towards closing that deal. And we want to avoid this scenario where we find a deal, we invest time and effort, but we really don't know where we stand. We've had no signal at all from the seller, but we keep going. And even without a signal, we continue to pour time and effort into that deal. So if the time and effort is invested, we are really flying blind in a sense. We don't know where we stand. It's really important that we figure that out. The buyer and seller need to know, do we have a potential to close this deal? So if we put in time and effort, we don't want to continue unless we first get some kind of a green light. We get some indication from the seller that we do have the makings of a deal here. And if we continue on that basis, we can justify the time and effort that we spend if we have a potential to close the deal. So the potential to close the deal means the buyer and seller are close on what? On the big 5 deal points. That's what I call them. Total price, how much we're paying. Is there going to be a seller note? How big is it percentage-wise and what are the terms? Number 3, is there going to be an earnout in this structure? How big will that be? What about the security package? We have to address the personal guarantee issue. And number 5, future seller involvement in the business. And we want to make sure the gap between the buyer and the seller is manageable when it comes to these big 5 deal points. So we want to know, how wide is the buyer-seller gap? If we have a huge gap between the buyer and the seller, to me, that's a red light. That's going to be a low priority for any buyer. If it's me, I'm going to pause or stop the process here. Not going to spend more time on this deal. So it's about the big 5 deal points. If we're a little closer, it might be kind of in the mid-range, iffy. Might continue, but only on a lower priority. So if I have limited time to invest in a deal, it probably won't be this deal. Right? That's the yellow light. But if we're fairly close, we get a green light, that's high priority. Now it's worth investing time and effort in this deal. I mean, practically speaking, what suggestion is being made here? Well, we put in time and effort, and if needed, when it's feasible, submit a preliminary or soft offer if you don't know where you stand. Have that soft offer cover the big 5 deal points, and then get a reaction from the seller. Are we getting a green light? Are they on the same page? Is it kind of iffy? Or are we miles apart? What we want to do is to stop flying blind. That's the purpose of the exercise. Now, if we do that, 2 immediate issues potentially surface. Number 1, valuing a business early can be risky, right? We might not get it right. And number 2, rapport takes time to build, which can be an issue because both a seller note and an earnout typically requires some rapport with the seller. So both issues can potentially widen the gap. Well, we build that right into the analysis. If we have the big 5 deal points and there's almost no distance at all between the buyer and seller position, we've got a green light. I mean, clearly, in this case, we have the makings of a deal. But you know what? Even if there's a gap, right, it's still potentially closable because it could be that we shaded the price lower to make an early offer. In other words, we're conservative out of the gate. We shade the price lower. We're still going to work this deal because to build ourselves a cushion, we went in a little bit lower. Now, the point of this exercise is not calibrating when the red turns to yellow and then turns to green. People sometimes ask me that. You know, if we have a red light, how do we know exactly how far the seller has to move before it's a yellow light, eventually turning into a green light? Well, that changes deal to deal, and I'm not going to get into that level of minutia in my discussion. The real point is just to shine some light on the gap. Don't operate in the dark, and don't fly blind and put a ton of effort in the deal without knowing where you stand. I mean, the normal progression really is we find a deal, we work towards a detailed offer, we get a letter of intent, and then we have a buy-sell agreement leading to the close of the deal. If we're in a situation where we don't know where we stand, and we put together a detailed offer on that basis, we are flying blind on the big 5 deal points and potentially wasting time and effort. So that's where the soft offer comes in. We make a preliminary soft offer based upon the big 5 deal points. And if we get a green light, we keep going to a detailed offer, to the letter of intent, and to buy-sell agreement. But to tell you the truth, very often if I put out a soft offer, I get a good response. I might skip the detailed offer and go right from the soft offer to the letter of intent and then on to the buy-sell agreement. You do have that option. And I typically do skip the detailed offer when I've got a soft offer. Occasionally I'll put one in if the situation warrants, but usually no. A soft offer is not always needed. For example, if we find a deal and almost immediately we do know where we stand. We do know what the gap is on the big 5 deal points. That's a known quantity and it's potentially closable. And we know that right off the bat. In that situation, I'm not going to bother typically with a soft offer. I'm going to go right to a detailed offer. I don't think in this situation a soft offer is needed. And so when I say a soft offer is not always needed, if you're not flying blind, I don't think you need a soft offer. Let's turn to question number 2. The accepted offer is a significant milestone. So we have to ask the question, what happens next? What happens after we have an accepted offer? And by the way, not before then. We want to make both points in the remainder of the video. An accepted offer, once we get it, we start the process of putting together a letter of intent. We put together our task list, what we need to have in place to finish off that LOI. We often work from a standard list of items that need covered off when we go from an accepted offer to an LOI. Note, we don't do this before we get the accepted offer. You got to be very careful about not investing too much time in deals unless we have some confidence that we're making progress. Number 2, we begin establishing the PEG value for net working capital. We need monthly balance sheets for that. We need to do the min-max analysis. We need to understand what their working capital requirements are in terms of ranges. We don't start on that until we have an accepted offer. But once we do, we get started. Number 3, we have a site visit with the seller if they're local. It's a judgment call when it comes to visiting out-of-town sellers prior to getting a letter of intent. Sometimes it makes sense, but like I said, you rely on judgment. I typically, if I'm going to make a trip like that, would prefer to be looking at 2 or 3 or 4 different situations and not incurring all that expense just to visit one seller. And of course, when we're visiting, we're focusing on building rapport with that seller. Number 4, customize the due diligence questionnaire so it's ready to go when the letter of intent is eventually signed. And we work from an existing standard due diligence questionnaire. We have our set questions, but we customize it and tailor it for this specific business. And I start that process after I get an accepted offer. Number 5, we start lining up the financing. We've already done some work on that, as our pre-planning module made clear. But now we're going to approach lenders for a term sheet. We're going to try and work up an equity package. Our next video is on finding the money. We'll go into a lot more detail on this in that video. Number 6, make sure your legal counsel is lined up so they're ready when the LOI is eventually signed. But I would avoid taking on unnecessary legal costs until you get a letter of intent signed. That's my own personal preference. And I like to limit it to business people talking business terms up and until we get to a letter of intent. Number 7, start the preliminary commercial due diligence. Just preliminary. We're not getting into heavy due diligence until we get a letter of intent signed. But I like to start early with a special focus on the quality of earnings. Where do revenue and earnings really come from in this business? We have to be absolutely rock solid on that before we're going to progress into a buy-sell agreement. So getting started after the offer is my preference. Now, we can summarize this presentation. It's a short one with 3 main ideas. The first idea I wanted to convey in this video is avoid investing major time and effort in a deal when you are flying blind, right? That is super important. Number 2, if you are flying blind, consider submitting an early soft offer covering the big 5 deal points. Find out where you're at with the seller. Number 3, avoid investing major time and effort without a closable gap on those big 5 deal points. Flying blind, it is a common issue with new business buyers. There's absolutely no doubt about it. So you want to make sure that you protect yourself against situations where you're wasting time and effort flying blind on these deals. As I mentioned, the next video is going to be on finding the money. Look forward to that one. Let's go out there and get after it. This is the Do-It-Yourself Guide to Business Buying. We've been talking today about the accepted offer. We always want to learn and grow as we go. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.